Freddie of R.A.D. Principles of Privacy Through Open Source Software. Freddie.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Alex. So, yeah, very quickly, we'll be talking about privacy, cryptography, and just, ways to use open source software to keep your information more secure and to do things like talk privately in systems that can't be compromised easily, or how to keep your systems a little bit more secure. Just very quickly, R.A.D, we're an anarchist autonomous collective. We do a variety of different types of projects. This is one of the things that we have been focusing on a lot lately, because we think that these issues matter. These are issues of privacy, and we want people to express themselves in any way that they want to, and we think that this is one way which we can keep speech free and allow free expressive thought and opinion. So what we're talking about is keeping secrets, and it's actually not a easy problem in any way, right? The principal things that we run into is that people are pretty bad at keeping secrets. It's usually not the technology, it's usually the people that are pretty bad about keeping the secrets. So in this quote here, that's what we refer to as endpoint security, what's happening on the other end of the line, you could say. And so, yeah, let's get into it maybe a little bit, and then we'll get started. Okay, so why it even matters. Humans are social beings, and when we're observed, we act differently. And so who's doing the observing, right? If you're walking past a surveillance camera, whether or not you're being monitored actually kind of doesn't matter, but the perception of being monitored will affect your behavior. So that's important. Freedom of speech and expression requires some freedom from retaliation of unpopular opinions. You should be allowed to say things freely without someone knocking at your door and asking you why you said that. No one wants to get a visit from any agencies. Then there's the actual real implications of what we've been reading about in the news. Just a widespread government surveillance of most major forms of communication. There was a report out by the ACLU of widespread surveillance of everyone using Department of Homeland Security fusion centers, and it's everywhere in the news. It's topical. I won't have to get into that much. Good security keeps people safe, regardless of what you're doing, what you're talking about. We all lock our doors when we go home. We don't change our doorknobs or our keys very often, do we? No, but we do lock our doors. So it can keep people you care about safe. And again, it's a basic human need. We as humans respect privacy and care about it quite a bit. So that should translate into the electronic world quite a bit. Okay. So just some basic vocabulary. Cryptography is just using computer algorithms to create encrypted messaging. Usually so when I say plain text, there's a message that's not decoded, right? Something that you can read. Usually these messages are created using encryption keys. It's a method of turning something into plain text or into a bunch of characters that nobody can understand. And then again, the endpoint security is who's really processing the messages, how they're doing it. And that's actually not like one definition. It really depends on the systems that we're talking about. Okay. So encryption really just works on math operations, right? You create big numbers, you run them through a bunch of mathematical operations, and use math to try to create messages that don't make sense to people without the key. Usually, especially when it comes to computers, the length of your key, that the encryption key is important. So 1024 is a very common one. 256, 128. It just depends on the encryption standard that's being used. For example, WPA2 I think is a 128-bit key. AES, the common one, is 256. It just depends on sort of the standard that's being used and what it's being used for. But the longer the key, usually the better. So how many people do we have here? Maybe 40, 30, something like that. So if I'm just thinking of a number between 1 and 100, right, we could crack it in, I don't know, 2 turns, 3 turns as a group, right? If I was thinking of a number between 1 and 1,000,000, that would take us significantly longer. If it's 1 to 1,000,000,000, even longer, right? So every character that I'm adding, 10, 100, 1,000, makes the key exponentially harder to crack with a finite set, which is, everyone in this room. So that's why the key length matters, because the longer the key, generally the harder it is to crack. Exponentially too. Okay, there's a lot of problems. Usually the software is just awful. Writing good code is hard enough. Writing good code that does cryptography well is it's very challenging. You have to consider who's using a system, what they're using it for. Is anyone going to be reviewing your code? It's extremely difficult, and software implementations are generally not as good as they should be. There's a couple reasons for that, one of which is, money. So Cisco has their VPNs that they run some encrypted protocol over, right? And most people don't know what the encryption's doing. Many groups, will create an encryption standard and not release their code, which is kind of troubling, right? If someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got something that can let us talk securely. By the way, I'm not telling you how it works. No, but that's an interesting, different discussion. We can come back to that. Most groups, usually if you're going to trust somebody, you would want to be able to read the code, read the spec, and really look at what's happening under the hood. And this is why free and open source software matters, especially when it comes to this sort of stuff, because you need people to actually say, hey, there's a bug right there, go and fix it. And there's also a lot of moving parts, right? There's a network level to consider. There's your application level, right? The actual, maybe it's the software program you're running. There's the operating system. For example, Cisco has an OS that runs on all the routers, right? There's a really big OS bug that Cisco refuses to acknowledge because it's bad for their business, and they just refuse to allow anyone to publish it. That's bad when most of the world's routers and switches and stuff like that run off of Cisco, systems. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of complexity, but and it's a difficult challenge. But there are some basic things that we can all do to sort of, it's not. Let's not declare defeat right here. There's a lot of good things that we can discuss, and that's what I'm going to go into a little bit. Okay, so there's this principle in cryptography that if you know everything about a system except for the key, it should still be secure. So if I were to tell you, hey, here's my laptop, it's encrypted, good luck, and you don't have the key, it should take you, a long time, or maybe you can never crack it. And that would be a good system. Everything that's public about the free and open source software that we use, there's nothing hidden about it. And that's good because it means that you can trust it in some way that, like I said, get back to that example. Someone says, I set up this secure system for us to communicate, but I can't tell you how it works. That sort of throws a big curve into it. So there's this basic principle that everything should be known about the system except for the public keys. This is why we generally like open source protocols. Free and open source software is written specifically to address some of these issues. One of our favorite libraries is called Off the Record. What it is an encryption library that is used for synchronous messaging. So how many people use Jabber here? Know what Jabber is? Okay, anyone use Google Talk? Okay, so Google Talk was built on the XMPP or Jabber protocol. It doesn't implement it completely, so Google Talk is kind of crippled. But Jabber is sort of an IM client, like AIM or anything like that, or an IM service. And you can download a library that allows you to log in, chat, and you share keys with people. And it allows you to encrypt and decrypt messaging sort of on the fly without you having to do anything. And it's generally a much better way to communicate than, say, Google Talk or Facebook Chat or anything like that. There's a library that we use often. It's called Off the Record. And it sort of encrypts everything for you when you're doing secure messaging. And it's really nice, and it's very well-written code, and lots of people review it, lots of people look at it, and the consensus is that it's a good library, it's a good standard to use, and a lot of applications use it. So I will mention it again because it's used so often. So there's GPG keys. Does anyone use GPG keys? Okay, I guess not. It's a way of signing a file, typically email. So what you do is you create two keys, one which you share publicly and one that you keep privately. And when someone sends you an email, you can use your private key to decrypt it. And you can share your public one so people can authenticate against each other. It uses a special type of a key. It's called the asymmetric public key. There are others, like Off the Record uses a symmetric key. There's differences in sort of why you would use them, how you would use them. It really depends on the type of messaging you're doing. Does anyone understand the difference between symmetric and asymmetric keys? Probably not.
One can be cut in half and then equal on both sides, and asymmetrical is when it's cut in half and it's not equal to both sides.
Well, yeah, but sort of. So there was a hand back there too. Is it Alice? Behind you, there was someone raising their hand? Okay, so what symmetric keys are and asymmetric keys have to do with how you synchronize messages. So an email can come into you at any time, right? And you wouldn't be expecting or waiting for it. So the way that you would encrypt it would be different than if you and I open up a secure chat and are waiting for messages to come back and forward. So it just really depends on who's waiting for messages and when. And there's different types of keys for that sort of, to answer that question. It's actually not a trivial question about who's sending messages forward and who's expecting for messages and stuff like that. So if you are interested in encrypting your email, ClauseMail is a good client to use. It doesn't encrypt everything. For example, the headers, who it's going to, who it's from, the subject. Those never get encrypted in emails, but you can do it. There was 2 weeks ago I read a standard a report that journalists have been using GPG signed emails something like 10 times at a level 10 times of what they were before Edward Snowden leaked all the documents that he did, which is good to see. It's encouraging to see, but most people don't encrypt their email. So there's a lot of applications that people can use and download for their various devices. There's a group called Open Whisper Systems, I believe it's called, that created these two applications, Redphone and TextSecure. TextSecure is a text messaging application that uses the OTR library, and Redphone is like a encrypted phone call type of system. Both open source. The code is really well reviewed, and generally people trust it significantly. And then you can do a lot of things like connect to a VPN or use a Tor browser on Android. And we'll talk about Tor and VPN in a second. But so there's other applications like Truecrypt, which will what you do is you create an encrypted folder on your desktop or your computer somewhere, and you bring files into the folder, and they get encrypted on the fly. You don't have to type in any password. Well, you do have to type in your passwords, but so what it does is it sets up a secure encrypted folder on your machine. If you don't have like full disk encryption, most good Linux distributions will allow you to encrypt your entire hard drive. But if you don't want to do that, you can create folders that are encrypted for files. And Truecrypt lets you do that. You know, you can run it on Windows or any of the GNU Linux distributions, and also on OS X or whatever Apple's doing, whatever they call it now. Is it still OS X? Yeah, sure. So web browsers, just don't use Internet Explorer. Use anything else. Literally anything else, except for like, I don't know, Netscape 9 or something. Chrome. Well, so Chrome is Chrome. What Google did is they took the Chromium open source browser and then they put their Google Analytics on top of it. So it like will report back what you're searching and keep a lot of things that you probably don't want saved. That's the reason not to use Google Chrome, because it reports back to Google. And if you want to be secure, you don't want your statistics being sent off to someone to do whatever they do at Google. So that's why Chromium's up there and not Google Chrome. And it's literally the exact same, all the same functionality. So use that instead. Okay.
Why avoid Safari not?
Because it's written by Apple and there's no published source code. So web browsers in particular are huge. You know, you can do a lot with a web browser, and one of the problems with encryption and software in general is that the more code you have, the more possibilities you have. I think there's one bug per every 1,000 lines of code is the sort of the general outline, and the code base for Firefox is massive, and you know, so really what you want is as little code, or you know, maybe as few things happening in the system as possible. So there's a story that what I forget his first name, Alexander at the NSA. He's like the deputy director, the top guy or something over there, and he goes to the Apple store, and so he goes to the Apple store, and the Apple genius comes up to him and says, hey, check out the iPhone. It's got over 400,000 applications. And the guy says, like, laughs to himself, and he says to his wife, this is a true story, he says, 400,000 applications, that's 400,000 ways to exploit the iPhone OS. And this is true, right? Because the more that you can introduce into a system, the more possibilities of compromising it. And so web browsers in particular, you don't want to use, they do so much that there's a lot going on there. They're pretty nasty in terms of keeping secure. So you'll see a lot of updates to Firefox or Chromium. If anyone uses Firefox on Ubuntu, I mean, I know I do, it's always updating. I actually used to work with the Mozilla team on Ubuntu. I was one of the first people to help found it. There's a lot of security review that goes on in that sort of by necessity. So web browsers are particularly nasty. So there's that. Okay, so VPNs, Is everyone familiar with VPNs or what a VPN is? So all a VPN will do is route your network traffic to somewhere else. And typically, you want to have a VPN. So what it'll do is it'll encrypt your traffic and pass it on somewhere else. Somewhere that like maybe your ISP won't see it, or maybe they'll pass it through as encrypted internet traffic. And it's helpful to have sort of maybe a VPN that's overseas. You want a VPN that has a history of non-cooperation with like law enforcement. And then there's a lot of VPNs that'll take cash or alternative forms of payment. Like you can mail them in a check with your account number, or a money order or something like that. So there are some good VPNs out there that exist, but you really do have to do your research on them. But it is good to have a VPN that will route your traffic somewhere else. It'll give you a significant amount of secrecy that you might not otherwise have sending your traffic through your ISP. And then there's two protocols: OpenVPN, which is the open source one, and maybe you'll use IPsec or something like that. The trade-off is that you'll slow down, but if you want to stay secret online, it's one way to do it, or to keep some secrecy, or privacy, I should say. Oh, what did I do? It will provide a significant amount of privacy. Where are we? Okay. Tor's another one. It's a web browser, like we talked about web browsers before. It's a sort of a standalone web browser. It'll route your network through your internet traffic through the Tor network. Who's familiar with that? Yeah.
Tor itself is not just a web browser.
Oh, no. Sorry. The Tor browser bundle is a web browser that will automatically route your, sorry, thanks, Jim, will route your internet traffic through the Tor network. Yeah, so sorry for the confusion. So there is a browser bundle that you can download and run that'll launch a web browser and send all your network traffic through the Tor network.
Did they fix that security bug?
Yes. So there was a pretty nasty bug in a specific Firefox build. That was the one that was shipped by default on the Google Chrome OS, the Chromebooks. There was a pretty nasty bug in there that was reporting back IPs to the FBI that the FBI was exploiting. But that's been fixed. So these things happen. It was it was a very specific build, and it was very specific. It's very limited. But these things happen. This is why it's important to have open bug tracking, open dialogues between developers and the community. With good, safety security, people will say, hey, this thing happened. You should go check out your system. And that's what happened, that there was a patch to Firefox pretty quickly. So the Tor network, everyone's familiar with it? Not familiar with it? Maybe show of hands if you're not familiar with Tor. Okay, so basically what Tor does is it'll set up a connection of routers, or what are called onions, which will take your internet traffic and pass it on to other onions or routers, I guess you could call them, and it just builds layers of security because it'll relay your traffic from one encrypted route to another, and just sort of bounce it along encrypted relays until you reach the endpoint, in which point your internet traffic is decrypted. I have infographics, I think, from the EFF. So here's sort of a standard way to look at your internet traffic, right? You connect on your Wi-Fi, you go to your ISP sends it down to whichever site you're trying to connect to, and then there's multiple places along the way that things can happen, right? Somebody could be sitting on your network and gathering your network traffic. The ISP, for example, let's say you're downloading some movie that they don't like, they'll share the information with the MPAA. whichever site you visit, Google, for example, might share your information with someone else. For example, if this site is Facebook, we know that Facebook sells your information to third parties. We know all of that. So there's a lot that happens in connecting without Tor, and there's a lot of people that can sort of sit in the middle and sort of try to gather what you're doing or can see exactly what you're doing. So what Tor allows you to do is sort of bypass that, right? It'll connect to a relay, which will connect to another relay, which will connect to another relay, and eventually pass on your traffic to the endpoint. At which point, you're on the site as you normally would be without, maybe your ISP in there, maybe someone's trying to eavesdrop on your conversations. It sort of bypasses that network. So there's that. Questions? And like Alex had said, yeah, Alex. Yeah. That's a big compromise is speed. Because, you have to encrypt the traffic and re-encrypt and decrypt, and you have to re-encrypt and decrypt and re-encrypt and pass it on back and forward. There is a significant speed trade-off, but the upside is you stay pretty anonymous on the internet. There are some places along the way where you're not as probably well hidden. So when you enter the Tor network, people can see you entering. Yeah, sorry.
Last year they spoke a little bit about Tor. I looked into it a little bit, and it's good except for something called visual videos or something. A person needs to look into that one. They were saying if you're going to be utilizing Tor and you want to be sending photographs or something, don't utilize it because it has a problem within the program. It's right back at the beginning of the Tor explanation.
I don't know about that. Alice, do you know?
I'm not certain I recall. I only looked at it once and I thought, I might be utilizing this, so I think I'm going to be better about this
Video thing with Flash. Yeah. It locks plugins by default. Because Flash could report where you're coming from, the way it works, so Tor tries to block out those notifications. So it won't let you run like Visual 2 or something.
Well, you should still be able to watch HTML5 videos.
Right.
Those don't use Flash. So
Okay.
just like disable your Flash plugin, any videos that still work will be HTML5 and therefore safe.
Interesting. I had not heard about that. Then again, I don't spend my time on YouTube on the Tor network, so there's that too. So interesting. I have to look into that. Maybe we'll talk in the hack. Yeah.
You Google it or you search for it, and it gives you an explanation
Yeah.
of its assets, and it gives you just one indicative.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to look up the documentation. We'll be at the hacker space, and we can all talk a little bit more. Okay, so there's that. Oh, iPhones. I generally don't suggest anyone get one. But, there are some programs that allow you to chat securely. Chat Secure is one. It's pretty well reviewed. There are a lot of people that, there are people that do this sort of stuff all day, review different libraries and implementations, and it seems to be okay. iMessage is supposed to be encrypted, so Apple claims to have 300 billion messages encrypted sent over their iMessage. And I don't know what to think about it, which should raise some red flags. They have some proprietary way of sending these messages that no one has seen. No one can review them. And it's all under the hood to the user, which kind of is a little bit scary. But you also hear reports of, the DEA getting frustrated that they can't decrypt it fast enough, on cases with drug dealers or whatever. But I don't know what to think about Apple. Everything is under the hood, and that's kind of scary. So I don't suggest that you use it. There's an application here, Wicker, which is a perfect example. It's some proprietary encryption application that has no open code. Nobody knows what's happening. But they also have a history of not cooperating with law enforcement and things like that. So it's kind of in that gray area that I don't trust. So I just thought I would mention it in passing, just because, you know, it's sort of to reinforce that that the standard should be open, and when something's not open, like is the standard for most iPhone apps and all that stuff, I generally don't trust it, and I suggest you don't as well.
So you're saying don't trust either, any of that?
So Apple was cooperating with the NSA's prison. So yeah, I don't know what to think about it. I mean, obviously everyone has iPhones; they're everywhere in the world. But Apple, I generally don't trust. The only thing that's open about Apple's products are what they stole from, or ripped off from the Linux libraries. I don't trust it because, for example, iMessage is a great example, right? They claim everything is encrypted. They claim that they send over 300 billion messages, but the keys are stored on Apple's servers, right? You compromise Apple's servers, you break the encryption, and you're done, right? So that's one thing that I don't trust. The other thing is that there's some trade-off, right? When you go to send your iMessage for the first time, it's encrypted, you don't set it up, so there are some assumptions that have to be made about how to send the messages, about how to write the key, and nobody's ever printed what those assumptions are. And it might be a good assumption, but since we can't review it, there's no way to know. I do have some more information about iMessage. It's a little bit more technical, but we can talk about it at the hackerspace. Yeah, Apple does have history. Well, a lot of companies do, but Apple was involved in the prison program. Nobody knows to what extent, and nobody knows to what, how much information was being given over. But there is some evidence that like the DA really hates iMessage because Apple can't they can't decrypt it fast enough for DA's happiness. So I don't know what to think about it, and that's kind of a red flag. That's really what I was trying to get at, is that when you really don't know what's going on under the hood, things get it weirds me out. I guess I could say that. So I don't recommend it. But. Yeah.
So to me, that even if you trusted Apple implicitly, they're great piggies out of California, they're all tree hugging and everything. If you did, they still have to answer to governments.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can always talk more too. So a couple more ending points, I guess. So best practices. I think this is like my second to last slide. Just to reiterate some things, build your systems on top of each other, right? If you're going to be running like a VPN or something, or maybe a Tor browser, like, connecting using the Tor browser bundle, it doesn't do you any good to just, leave your laptop unencrypted. Anyone can just open it up, connect. It doesn't do you any good to save your passwords anywhere on the system. So you really can connect a lot of these things together. For example, the Jabber thing, you can have your OTR conversations forwarded through your VPN, or maybe to a proxy or something like that. There's a lot of overlap, and a lot of these systems will work together. You just kind of have to sort of take the time, understand what's happening, and really want to implement it. Keep layers of security. If your email is compromised, like whose emails is connected to their Facebook and Twitter and, I don't know what else. Like, I know mine is, right? If my personal email is compromised, okay, I can deal with my Facebook getting taken. But there are other things that I keep completely separate, right? For example, when I work, like at my office or whatever, there are I won't connect. I would never take my laptop, my personal laptop, and connect it to my work machine, my work computers, ever, right? So there are systems that you want to keep, because I don't know what's happening on my work my work's network. You know, I don't control that, so I know what I consider secure, and I know what I consider unsecure, and I try to keep those completely separate, because if something were to fail, I know sort of the limit, you know, the damage will be limited by how much. Change your passwords. When was the last time someone changed their passwords? If it was over a year, raise your hand if you haven't changed your password in over a year. Yeah, that's bad. So change your passwords at least once a year. You know, like 4 months ago, one of my bank accounts was compromised. It happens, you know. All the passwords got changed on all of my systems, you know. It happens, and it's good to have reminders, like stuff that's outside of your control, that you should change your passwords regularly and not use the same password for everything, which I know a lot of us do.
So are you saying change your password to just your computer or versus everything you do? Like if you say you had a Sears account, change that password to it?
So like, let me use a real world example. My private email is linked to, you know, maybe my Facebook and a couple of bank accounts. And so when my bank account got compromised, right, I know, okay, so here's what can be touched by my information being leaked, right? Or not leaked, but sort of broken. So I had to change my email, my bank accounts, my Facebook, and then anything else that might have been able to associate with that bank account. So you don't have to change everything all at once, but just consider, like, okay, if my email were to be compromised, what's in there that can be affected, right? So usually it's like a bank account, it's probably like maybe a CTA card. So you don't have to go crazy and change I'm not telling you to go out here and change your ATM PIN right now. That's not the case. But, you know, if something were to happen on your bank account, let's say you find some fraudulent charges or something, you know, it would do you good to change your passwords. That's what I'm getting at. But no, don't go out and change all of your passwords all in the same day either. That's bad because you will forget them and then be locked out of your systems. It happened to me like 4 times last month. So don't do that either. The longer the password, the better. Keep it over 20 characters. Sentences are good. Phrases that are personal that most people don't know are good. Book passages are probably, you know, interesting. Things like that. Quotes that you might find interesting. You know, if you're a big baseball fan, maybe you'll write down your password related to something that a friend said to you at the ballpark. But your password should definitely not be, you know, like take me out to the ball game or something. Like, don't do that. And don't keep logs. You know, it doesn't do you any good to have encrypted systems and keep logs. Like when Chelsea Manning was talking and setting up the WikiLeaks stuff, the person that she was communicating with was keeping logs. Like, why would you do that if you're setting up an encrypted system to talk? And that's how she got court-martialed and sentenced to like 36 years in jail. Don't keep logs. This is that endpoint security, though. This is that who you're talking to matters, and you have to be able to trust them. And it's the people that really screw up. So don't keep logs. Some resources. Tails is like a Debian distribution OS that will run all of your systems. Like you download it, it's a live CD, you boot it off of it, and by default it'll connect to like the Tor network. And you know, they've got a lot of good documentation too about like how to set up secure emails and you know, sign your emails using GPG. So they're a pretty good Linux distro to check out. There's a white paper called Encryption Works by the Press Freedom Foundation. It's really good. It's like 20 pages. It's really tailored toward beginners. It'll have a lot more in-depth sort of information that I covered over quickly, like how to set up an OTR library, how you share a key, all that stuff that I didn't go into. The EFF is really good. They've got some. So the EFF, everyone's familiar with the EFF, I assume so. Sure, they're like the ACLU of the internet. Is what I like to refer to them as. And then there's this alternatives.tacticaltech.org. It just sort of it's just like a website that lists different programs you can use. So instead of using like Google to search, maybe it'll tell you to use DuckDuckGo, things like that. Things that are known to not track people and not monitor or report back. All of those types of things. So that's what I have for resources. Do we have time for questions?
We have a minute or two, yeah.
Okay, cool. Sure.
Yeah, we got about 1 minute.
Okay, so I want to give thanks to Free Geek Chicago, especially Alex, for inviting us to come talk. So thank you for having us. Thanks for listening. And thanks to anyone who runs and uses open source software, writes code. All of that stuff matters significantly. So that's what I have. Questions?
Could you use the encrypt like the directories of USB?
Truecrypt?
So yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Have you heard anything yet about this self-destructing emails? So if I want to send you or my mom an email, I can go to this, it's on Ken Commando's website, and just set it up. And then this way I can send a message to my mother. For example, my, I don't know, my account, here you can make deposits to this bank account, number. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, there are a lot of services that will, for example, there's one service called Gorilla Mail that will set you up with a temporary email for like 15 minutes. These things exist. They're out there. You should check them out, especially if you're like registering for some crap that you never need, like ballpark tickets or something. Like, maybe.
So it's not as secure as or anything like that?
So if you're gonna send sensitive information over email, which I don't recommend doing, you should encrypt your email. Is what I would recommend.
So it's not really a form of encryption?
What's that?
So it's not really a form of encryption?
Well, I mean, there are services that do temporary emails. I just, the only thing I've ever used them for is for registering for something that I will never use again. Like I said, I needed to sign up for some concert ticket website or something,
Could you go back to resources for me?
Sure. Rise Up is a very good resource. I didn't put them on there. So what they do is they're sort of a tech collective run out of Seattle. They have a lot of good manuals, a lot of how-tos. They're really good about giving good information for RiseUp.net. Yeah. Let's go back to resources. Okay.
I think one more question and then we got it.
All right.
Yeah, so can we still trust the RSA site?
No.
No?
No. Which one? RSA 2, I think? No. People that really do this encryption stuff full time really worry about whether RSA, Inc., whatever the company is going to be in business in 5 years. So, yeah.